Red Keep was still that morning. The winter sun angled low across the rooftops, painting the stones with a pale, meager warmth. Ned Stark stood in the center of that courtyard, his breath drifting before him in pale clouds. A hush had fallen over the space, over the assembled lords and ladies, soldiers and servants. Varys watched from a balcony with his half-lidded, unreadable gaze, while Peter Baelish lounged against a pillar, a faintly curious arch to his eyebrow. Cersei Lannister was present too, her lips pressed into a thin line. Jaime stood behind her in gleaming armor, one hand on the gilded pommel of his sword. And near them, with a dark look wrinkling his brow, stood King Robert Baratheon in a fur-lined cloak, the stag emblem on his surcoat a reminder of the rebellion that had brought them all to this moment. At Robert's side was a boy with red gold hair. Joffrey, the heir that everyone, at least until now, assumed would someday succeed the throne. And half hidden in the crowd but burning like a flame at Ned's side was Jon Snow himself, confused and uneasy, uncertain why he had been summoned to King's Landing from Winterfell. Ned turned to meet Robert's gaze. He saw an old companion behind those eyes, a brother in arms from days when they were young and the world was simpler. But that brother had been corroded by the weight of the crown and the illusions of power. Robert was thicker now, gray creeping through his black hair, lines carved around his eyes. Between them lay the memory of blood spilled in Robert's rebellion. Aerys Targaryen, Rhaegar Targaryen, the dragons destroyed so the stag might rule. Jon had never known those histories in the way Ned did. He had only known that he was a bastard, a child Ned had claimed from some unknown mother. The name Snow had marked him as an outsider among the Starks. But Ned had lived in agony all those years, wrestling with a promise, with a secret, with the truth of who Jon really was. A Targaryen, the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna Stark, born in the silent despair of the Tower of Joy. Ned had concealed it all for love of his sister, for fear of Robert's wrath, for loyalty to the realm. But now that secret would unravel. The hush deepened. Something about Ned's stillness, the look in his gray eyes, spread an unease through the watchers. No one dared to speak. A pair of guardsmen coughed in the background. Overhead, the sky seemed impossibly clear, the air as sharp as a newly honed blade. Ned could feel his own heartbeat thrumming with a punishing tempo, and he forced himself to keep his composure. He had summoned them all, asked the king's presence in public, demanded witness from the lords of the realm, even insisted on the presence of the city watch. He had tried time and again to keep this secret hidden, but events had driven him to the brink. Whispers had begun to swirl, letters from distant lands, rumors that might endanger Jon if the truth were uncovered in some other, more violent manner. Ned's loyalty to the boy and to Lyanna's last wish outweighed any fear of Robert's wrath. The moment had arrived to break his silence. "I have called you all here," Ned began, "to speak a truth long hidden. This is not a matter I unveil lightly, but one which the honor of the realm, and my own honor, compels me to reveal." He stopped, glancing at Jon for a moment. The boy's dark eyes were fixed upon him with an expression that mingled trust and dread. Jon's hand twitched near the hilt of a sword that had been strapped to his waist, a sword he seldom drew except during training. The onlookers leaned in. On the balcony, Varys's face was carefully neutral, his hands folded over his ample belly. Cersei's knuckles had gone white. Perhaps some part of her guessed at what was coming, or feared it might be something else entirely. Robert exhaled, a short grunt. "Speak your truth, Ned," he growled. "I've no time for riddles this morning. Is there treason lurking in the air, or some fancy of your northern gods?" The king's tone was impatient, but behind it lay an old affection. He might still trust Ned Stark more than any other man alive, if only slightly. That trust would soon be tested. Ned inhaled, the cold air biting deep into his lungs. "There is a secret that has shadowed me since the end of Robert's rebellion," he said, his voice calm but resonant. "You, Robert, brought down House Targaryen, toppling the Mad King, seizing the throne for House Baratheon. We fought side by side at the Trident. We saw Rhaegar Targaryen fall. Then, in the final days of the rebellion, I found my sister, Lyanna, in the Tower of Joy. He paused and heard the sudden hush, felt the tension coil. Everyone knew the story or thought they knew it. The realm believed Rhaegar had abducted Lyanna against her will. She died there, so the tale went, and Ned returned with a bastard child from the war. That child was Jon Snow. Ned continued, pressing on with the words that would change the course of the realm. Lyanna bore a child in the Tower of Joy. That child was fathered, not by some nameless man, but by Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. A collective gasp ran through the courtyard. Peter Baelish straightened in shock, though a small flicker in his eyes suggested that he suspected something of the sort. Cersei's face flashed with something akin to horror or fury. Jaime's hand tightened on his sword. Joffrey's petulant features tightened in confusion, but Robert merely stared, uncertain if he had heard correctly. Ned pressed on. That child was placed into my care. For the sake of Lyanna's dying wish and from fear of your rage, Robert, I concealed the truth. I named the boy Jon Snow, claimed him as my own bastard to shield him from those who would see the last Targaryen heir destroyed. But that was a lie. Jon Snow is not my bastard. He is the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, my sister, whom I loved more than life itself. He is Jon Targaryen, rightful heir of the dragon's blood. The silence was absolute, as though the entire realm had drawn its breath and forgotten to release it. Jon staggered as if struck. The color drained from his face. He looked at Ned, at the father he had known all his life, and saw in him a truth that defied every notion he had ever held of his own identity. The rest of the crowd reacted in a chorus of muffled exclamations, wide eyes, or stifled curses. Some looked at Jon with disbelief, some with outrage, some with new fear or wonder. The clank of a guard's armor broke the hush. Then a voice, Robert's voice, burst out, raw with anger and confusion. You lie, Robert spat. His eyes were wild, storm blue, and furious. Ned, have you lost your wits, man? This is treason. You would claim this bastard is Rhaegar's spawn? The Targaryens are dead. I saw them destroyed. His thick hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for a moment it seemed he might hurl himself at Ned. But Ned held his ground, Jaw said. It is the truth, Ned said softly, and you know my honor. I have never willingly spoken a lie, Robert, even for the sake of my own life. I wanted to tell you long ago, but I knew what you would do to a child of Rhaegar Targaryen. The words trembled in the air. Everyone recalled how Robert had raged against any Targaryen heir, how the golden-haired children of Rhaegar had died in King's Landing when Tywin Lannister sacked the city. That was the war. That was the reality that Ned had to keep from swallowing Jon alive. Jon was breathing quickly, trying to make sense of the tidal wave of revelations. He stared from Ned to Robert, confusion etched across his features as though the world had abruptly shifted under his feet. Father, Jon whispered, though a moment later he realized father was no longer the correct word. Am I? Ned turned to him, placing a steadying hand on Jon's shoulder. You are still my son in every way that matters, Jon, he said gently, but yes, you have Targaryen blood. You have a claim to the Iron Throne that none can dismiss. Lyanna was lawfully wedded to Rhaegar in secret. By rights of birth and blood, you are the heir of House Targaryen. A new wave of astonishment swept the courtyard. That single phrase, heir of House Targaryen, might mean everything or nothing. To Robert, it was an abomination, a threat to his reign. To many others, it was a piece of living history that could plunge the realm back into war. The climate in the courtyard was electric, brimming with possibilities both dangerous and momentous. The onlookers sensed that whatever happened next would reshape the Seven Kingdoms. Robert looked as if someone had run a sword through him. He glanced around as if searching for a denial, for some sort of contradiction. But no one spoke. Too many recognized the ring of Ned Stark's truth. Varys, with that unreadable half-smile, inclined his head. Peter Baelish flicked his eyes between Ned and Jon, doubtless already plotting what profit might be gleaned from this. Cersei's expression was twisted in simmering hostility. If indeed Jon was a Targaryen, her own children's claims might be imperiled. She stepped closer to Robert, whispering something urgent, but the king swatted her hand away and stepped toward Ned. His voice came out hoarse. You dare to lay this at my feet now, Stark? You kept such a secret from me all these years. His eyes flicked momentarily to Jon, and for an instant Robert's features contorted with a sorrow or betrayal too deep to name. Then his rage returned, sparked like an oil-soaked torch. If this boy is Rhaegar's get, he should be put to the sword this instant, as all Targaryen pretenders should be. No, Ned said firmly. We are not in the days of war. Lyanna was your friend once, Robert. Rhaegar is long dead. This boy is innocent. And if you think to kill him, you'll have to kill me first. Ned's tone was steel. The watchers gaped, many of them never having seen Eddard Stark speak so boldly to a king. But Ned had known Robert before the crown and was no stranger to the man's threats. The king's fury flared, but something in Ned's stance held him at bay. His gaze flicked to the swords all around, loyal Stark guards among them, men of the north who had marched down at Ned's request. Then he turned his glare to the courtyard, seeing the curious faces. Killing the boy right here, in plain sight, might spark a storm of controversy, perhaps even open rebellion. Robert might be strong-willed, but he was not entirely blind to consequences. "You bastard," Robert muttered. "You absolute, thrice-damned bastard, Ned." He turned, casting a look at Jon that glimmered with hatred and something else, pain, perhaps, or regret. Then he wheeled and stomped off, leaving the courtyard in an uproar. Cersei followed, hissing. Jaime cast one final glance at Ned, then turned to go. The rest remained transfixed. Jon looked as though he might collapse, but Ned laid a reassuring hand on his shoulder and steadied him. That was the moment the realm changed. At last, Ned had peeled back the veil of secrecy that had shielded Jon. The truth was out. The Targaryen line lived through Jon. In the wake of that revelation, every lord and lady gathered in the courtyard knew that the delicate balances of power were about to shift. The old wounds from Robert's rebellion still festered in the hearts of many. And now the king, who had once been the realm's hero, stood challenged by a boy he had believed a bastard of House Stark. The ripple of tension spread outward through King's Landing like a thunderclap. They were ushered into the great hall not long after, the gold and scarlet tapestries mocking the tensions with their bright depictions of hunts and coronations. Robert demanded counsel behind closed doors, but Ned refused to hide the matter away. He insisted on a public hearing, that the lords of the realm might witness the truth. Word was already spreading through the city. Crowds clustered in the streets, rumors piling upon rumors. Jon Snow was a Targaryen. Ned Stark had deceived the king. The realm was on the brink of civil war. Yet in the great hall, beneath the Iron Throne, the drama reached a new zenith. Robert sat on that monstrous throne of twisted swords uncomfortably. His face was red, partly from anger, partly from the remnants of last night's wine. Cersei stood at his side, green eyes bright with cunning, while Joffrey and Myrcella hovered behind her, uncertain. The High Septon had arrived, trembling, uncertain what demands might be placed upon him. Ser Barristan Selmy, the Lord Commander of the King's Guard, stood vigil near the foot of the throne. Ned stood before them with Jon at his side. On either flank were lords of note, Stannis Baratheon with his grim face, Renly with a near-nervous smile, the Tyrells still uncertain how best to position themselves, the Lannisters watchful, the Red Viper of Dorne standing silent and calculating. All of them had come in haste as the rumor about the final Targaryen spread. Robert's voice boomed through the hall. "Ned Stark has made a dangerous claim. You all know the words he spoke in the courtyard. I have summoned you here to see if he dares repeat them, and if so, what proof he offers. By the gods, if this is some twisted ploy, he shall not leave this hall alive." Ned lifted his chin. He did not waver. "I dare repeat them," he said simply. "Jon Snow is the son of Lyanna Stark and Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, born in wedlock, therefore legitimate and last living heir to the Targaryen line. I have proof enough, the testimony of Howland Reed, who was with me at the Tower of Joy, and the records of the maester who wed Rhaegar and Lyanna." A ripple of gasps accompanied his words. Though the crown destroyed many Targaryen documents, not all evidence was lost. And more than proof, I have my own honor, which most of you know to be unyielding. I speak the truth. I lie only to save a life, never to endanger one. All eyes turned to Jon. He stood straight, but Ned could feel the quiver in the boy's muscles, the swirl of shock that threatened to spill over. He was untested in politics. He had grown up believing he was a bastard, an outcast, forced to join the Night's Watch if he wished for purpose, or to remain overshadowed by his legitimate siblings at Winterfell. Now, the entire realm looked upon him with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and awe. Cersei broke the silence, her voice a silken lash. "Is this not a direct challenge to our king's reign?" She looked around, seeking to stoke the crowd's fear. "We know what Targaryen rule was, the madness of Aerys. A Targaryen is unfit to sit the Iron Throne. We should deal with this threat to our children, to your children." Her eyes flicked from one lord to another. "If this is the rightful king, then what is Robert?" A wave of apprehension cascaded through the hall. Robert glowered at Cersei. He had never liked being reminded of the tenuousness of his claim. He had taken the throne by conquest, not by birth. And though Robert was well liked by many for his feats in the rebellion, The realm had seen his weaknesses grow over the years. His neglect, his extravagance, his reliance on courtiers who flattered him. But it was one thing to grumble about the king's failings in taverns and drawing rooms. It was quite another to face the idea of the Targaryen restoration. Ser Barristan Selmy suddenly stepped forward. The rustle of his white cloak echoed in the hush. He was an old man, but still possessed of great dignity. He looked at Jon, and something in the boy's dark hair, gray eyes, triggered a flood of memory. Rhaegar's sad, intense gaze, the hush that fell whenever the prince performed a song on the harp. Barristan had served House Targaryen until the war ended. He had seen the best and worst of them. Now, in front of the assembled lords, the grizzled knight bowed his head slightly. "I know that Ned Stark is a man of honor," he said. "If he swears this is true, I believe him." A murmur coursed through the crowd. Cersei shot Barristan a look of pure loathing, but the Kingsguard had spoken. Moreover, Rhaegar Targaryen was not his father, the Mad King. Rhaegar was a man both princely and gentle in many ways. This boy, Jon, may not carry the taint of madness. We do not know. Yet I cannot deny my oath to this throne, either. Robert snorted. "So you believe him, but your oath is to me, or to the seat on which I sit? If the boy is a Targaryen, does your oath shift to him?" "I took an oath to the king," Barristan replied. "Robert Baratheon is that king, anointed by the Seven and recognized by the realm. But the question stands. If the boy's claim is proven, what do we do?" The question hung like a sword suspended by a single hair. Some in the hall, like the Tyrells, measured whether supporting Jon might open a path to power. Others, like the Martells, recalled their hatred of the Lannisters for the children of Elia Martell murdered at the end of the rebellion. Perhaps Dorne would see a chance for vengeance, or some reparation. The Starks and their northern banners looked to Ned for guidance. The Lords of the Vale, once so loyal to Jon Arryn, watched with bated breath. The entire realm perched on the edge of a knife. Ned drew a deep breath. "Robert, I do not seek to incite rebellion. I have never wanted this truth made public. But the time came when I could no longer hide it. He is my sister's son, and I will protect him. If you are the king you claim to be just, strong, then you will not slay this boy for crimes committed by his grandfather. If you fear him as a threat to your seat, then do the honorable thing. Prove you are a better man than the Mad King ever was. Recognize him as a prince of the realm, give him a place. You need not yield your crown. The realm will decide in time." A hush fell. Robert stared down from the Iron Throne. Sweat trickled down his temple. He looked older than his years, weighed upon by guilt and anger. He loved Ned like a brother, or had once. And in Ned's plea, he heard an echo of the day Lyanna died. Perhaps Robert thought he could not kill her son. But to legitimize him openly, to say that a Targaryen had a rightful claim, felt like sealing his own doom or that of his children. The moment stretched. Robert let out a ragged breath. "Damn you, Ned," he said, and his voice cracked under the weight of memory. "Damn you for this. You should have told me sooner. You should have trusted me." But both of them knew what might have happened had Ned confessed decades ago. Jon would be dead along with any Targaryen in Robert's path. The boy's existence would have threatened Robert's hold on the throne in those early days when the king's rage still burned like a forge. Ned had not dared risk it. Now, in front of so many witnesses, Robert had little choice but to appear magnanimous or become the villain. Slowly, painfully, he said, "I will not put the boy to death. Not while I draw breath. But by all the gods, I do not hand over my throne. If any man here would see Targaryens restored, let them come at me openly. I will meet them with steel." He waved a thick hand at Jon. "If he is who you say he is, I will not brand him a traitor for being born. Let him live under the protection of House Stark. We shall see what becomes of him. But I swear this, Ned, if I find him plotting to seize my throne, or if any of your northern lords rally to High's banner against me, I will put down this threat as I would put down a rabid dog. Do you understand?" Ned nodded curtly, relief and tension mingling in his gut. It was the best outcome he could have hoped for. Jon would live, recognized as a Targaryen by the king's own words, though not acknowledged as heir. Robert's uneasy compromise placed the realm in a precarious new balance. Everyone present understood that for Jon, the path ahead would be fraught with danger. But for now at least, his life was spared and the realm had time to absorb this monumental shock. In the days that followed, King's Landing buzzed like a hornet's nest. The small folk spoke of little else. The lords from all corners of the realm either sent ravens or remained in the city, anxious to see which way the wind blew. Jon found himself besieged by stares wherever he walked. Some were frightened, some hostile, some odd. He felt the weight of 1,000 expectations and resentments. He wished only for the quiet life he had known as a boy at Winterfell when he was simply Ned Stark's unacknowledged bastard. But those days were gone. The truth had forced him to confront a heritage that stretched back to Aegon the Conqueror. A pale dawn found him standing on a narrow balcony in the Red Keep, looking over the Blackwater Rush as gulls wheeled overhead. The smell of salt and sewage mingled in the air. He heard a step behind him and glanced back to see Ned approach, his face etched with concern. Jon bowed his head instinctively, uncertain how to address this man who had raised him. "Lord Stark," he said quietly. "Don't call me that," Ned said. "You are my son, whether by blood or not. That has not changed." His voice was gentle but firm. "I know you must have many questions." Jon exhaled. "I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know why you never told me. I always felt your love, but I felt your distance too, sometimes. I thought," he bit his lip, "I thought it was because I was a bastard." Ned laid a hand on Jon's shoulder. "I'm sorry for the hurt it caused. I did what I had to do for your protection. This was Lyanna's dying wish, protect you at all costs, keep you secret from Robert's wrath. I wanted to shield you from the burdens of your blood. But it seems fate would not be so kind." Jon's heart clenched. He pictured a mother he had never known, Lyanna Stark, a face from stories, from the statue in the crypts of Winterfell. "I don't know how to be a Targaryen," he said softly. "I hardly know what that means. Do I have to be your enemy now, my lord?" A flicker of pain crossed Ned's eyes. "Never," he said firmly. "I did not reveal this secret so you would be turned against me. I did it to keep you safe from the swirl of rumors that was growing." Varys hinted that certain factions were learning the truth. If they used it for their own ends, or if word reached the king without my involvement, there might have been an execution instead of a hearing. This way, at least, you have been acknowledged by Robert. It is not an easy path, but you will live." Jon looked at his hands. "What do I do now? Am I expected to claim the throne? Serve under King Robert? Live in exile? The king said he would let me live, but I can feel the hatred in his eyes whenever he looks at me." Ned pursed his lips. "For now, we remain cautious. You are named Targaryen by blood, but you are not recognized as the rightful heir in any official sense. Robert will want you close, I suspect, so he can watch you. But you must be careful. Cersei despises any threat to her children. The lords who might wish for a Targaryen restoration will seek to use you. And the realm is not so easily balanced. You must learn the Game of Thrones quickly, Jon, or it will devour you." Jon listened, heart pounding. He had never craved power, never pictured himself wearing a crown. Yet the ghost of his father, his real father, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, flickered in his imagination. All the stories painted him as a warrior, a tragic figure, the shining dragon prince who died upon the trident. Jon wondered if he had inherited any part of that legacy. Was the desire to rule hidden somewhere in his soul? Or was it the sword arm of a warrior poet he might discover? He had so many questions, none of which had a simple answer. Meanwhile, the realm churned around him. In the days and weeks that followed Ned's revelation, ravens flew to and from the Red Keep in a torrent. Some houses quietly pledged their swords to Robert Baratheon, affirming their loyalty in the face of uncertainty. Others sent cautious inquiries to Ned Stark, seeking to gauge the boy's intentions. In taverns and markets, folk argued heatedly, was this new Targaryen a threat or a savior? Did the realm suffer under Robert's neglectful rule, or was it stable enough without the reemergence of old dragons? Fingers danced upon dagger hilts, eyes slid sideways as alliances shifted. Among the members of the king's small council, tension simmered. Varys offered cryptic remarks. "Power resides where men believe it resides, my lords." Peter Baelish spread sly smiles, floating rumors designed to keep the realm off balance, ensuring that chaos would remain a ladder for him to climb. Stannis Baratheon declared openly that birthright was irrelevant if the boy threatened Robert, and that it was better to snuff out the Targaryen line once and for all. Renly, always more easygoing, suggested that perhaps the boy could be given lands or titles to appease any Targaryen loyalists. Yet none spoke plainly of forging a new war. The memory of Robert's rebellion was still fresh, and no one wished to repeat that bloodshed without a clear advantage. Ned Stark spent long hours trying to counsel Jon. At times, he tried to shield the boy from the swirl of politics, but it was impossible to keep him entirely hidden. Robert demanded Jon appear at certain feasts, always heavily guarded. At one such feast in the Great Hall, Jon was forced to sit near the royal family. Joffrey scowled at him from across the table. occasionally hurling petty insults. Myrcella was too well-bred to say anything, though her curious glances revealed a girl's fascination. Tommen seemed too young to grasp the deeper meaning of Jon's presence. Cersei, in her green gown, barely masked her loathing. Robert drank heavily, ignoring them all, as if he could banish the entire issue by drowning it in wine. Meanwhile, the lesser lords watched every interaction, eager for rumor. After the feast concluded, in the corridor beyond the hall, Joffrey blocked Jon's path. Though Joffrey was younger, he was a prince and arrogant, with a sneer twisting his thin lips. "My father may spare you," he spat, "but that doesn't mean I will. One day, when I'm king, I'll see your head on a spike for pretending to be my father's heir." Jon felt his anger flare. He was still reeling from the reveal of his parentage, still uncertain of his place, and this spoiled princeling had the gall to threaten him. But he recalled Ned's warning. "Be mindful. Do not lose your temper. Do not start a fight." He forced himself to remain calm. "I pretend at nothing," he replied quietly, staring Joffrey down. "I never asked for this. But remember, your father has allowed me to live, and so you must abide by his will, or disobey your king." Joffrey's eyes bulged with fury, but before he could retort, Sandor Clegane, the Hound, loomed into view. "Move along, your grace," the Hound growled with a dismissive grin at Joffrey. "The boy's got as much right to breathe as you do. Best not start a brawl in the corridor." The presence of the Hound unsettled Joffrey enough that he spat a curse and stalked away, leaving Jon shaken but proud that he had not let the prince unnerve him fully. He found Ned waiting near the doors, watching with a concerned look. "You handled that well," Ned said quietly, "but be wary. Joffrey has a cruel streak. He will never forget that you were not cowed." Tension grew by the day. In council meetings, Robert sought ways to defuse the new threat. He demanded that Ned keep Jon close. He even toyed with the notion of betrothing Jon to someone within the Baratheon Lannister fold, though that idea triggered scorn from Cersei. Ned politely turned down any such arrangement, insisting that Jon was too young, still grappling with his identity. The truth was, Ned feared tying Jon to the Lannisters would be akin to caging him among serpents. Beyond the Red Keep's walls, riots nearly broke out in Flea Bottom when unscrupulous tongues began proclaiming that the Targaryen restoration was at hand, that the foreign invaders who had toppled the rightful dynasty must be overthrown. Soldiers from the City Watch had to be dispatched, while gold cloaks marched through the streets at night. Whispers reached Ned's ear of a renewed Targaryen loyalist faction forming in secret, determined to see Jon placed on the throne. Other rumors claimed that assassins had been hired by the Lannisters to dispose of the boy quietly. In short, the city was a tinderbox, and Jon's very presence was the spark that might set it ablaze. Caught in the midst of it all, Jon's nights were sleepless. He found himself wandering the castle's corridors, sometimes alone, sometimes accompanied by a Stark guardsman. In a secluded corner of the Red Keep's library, he discovered old scrolls describing the Targaryen kings of the past: Aegon the Conqueror, Maegor the Cruel, the peaceful reign of Jaehaerys the Wise, the tragedies of the Dance of the Dragons. It was a family history that had belonged to him all along, yet he had never known it. He pored over the lines, learning about the Targaryen traditions of monarchy, about their sigil, the three-headed dragon, and their words, fire and blood. The more he read, the more he felt a sense of unease and awe. He was part of that line, but also an outsider in every sense. Late one evening, while the library's torches flickered low, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see a graceful figure in a dark cloak, Princess Arianne Martell of Dorne, in King's Landing as part of a diplomatic delegation. He had seen her once or twice, but never spoken to her before. She moved like a cat with quiet confidence, and her eyes glittered with the pride of Dorne. She offered him a small smile. "You burn the midnight candle, my prince," she said softly. He flushed. "I'm no prince, my lady." She lifted an eyebrow. "You are the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. By the laws of Westeros, that indeed makes you a prince. Forgive me if I do not blindly follow Robert Baratheon's refusal to acknowledge it." Jon exhaled, setting aside the old scroll. "My lady," he hesitated, uncertain what courtesy he owed her or how to respond. He had grown up shy around high-born ladies, never confident in himself. Now he was called a prince, which made the distance between them all the more perplexing. I was just reading about my father's family, my father by blood, he clarified, forcing the word out. I do not know what it means truly. I never wanted this. Arianne gave him a measuring look. Some might say fate chooses us and we have little say in the matter. But you do have a choice, I think. You can embrace your heritage or shy away from it. You have an opportunity to shape the realm, perhaps for the better. She paused, then added in a gentle tone, my uncle, Prince Oberyn, tells me Rhaegar Targaryen was a good man, though we in Dorne have reason to hate the Lannisters who slaughtered Elia and her children. Many Dornishmen remember that Rhaegar was a decent, if flawed, prince, certainly not mad like his father. If you share any of his qualities, the realm might benefit from your presence. But that is for you to decide, Jon Targaryen. Her words stirred conflicting emotions in him. He had not considered that some might see him as a beacon of hope rather than a threat. He studied her face, noticing the subtle pride in her posture and the glint of sincerity in her dark eyes. I don't want war, Jon said quietly, or bloodshed. I just want to exist without being hunted. But it seems that might not be possible. Arianne smiled ruefully. Nothing is certain, but know that Dorne does not fear the Baratheons or the Lannisters. If you ever require aid, well, we Dornish choose our own destinies. We have not forgotten Elia Martell, or how her children by Prince Rhaegar died. For better or worse, you are tied to that story by blood. With that, she departed, leaving Jon with a swirl of thoughts and possibilities. Could Dorne support him if he claimed the throne one day? Should he even make such a claim? In the weeks that followed, Ned Stark urged the king's permission to return north, hoping to bring Jon to Winterfell. The capital was a cauldron that might boil over at any moment. Robert, though, was reluctant to let Jon out of his sight, for fear the boy would raise a northern army. Ultimately, they struck a compromise. Ned and Jon would remain in King's Landing for a few more moons, to show the realm that they had no intention of fomenting rebellion. Sansa Stark and Arya Stark, still in the city, were overjoyed to see more of their brother, though they too had to grapple with the sudden revelation that Jon was not their father's son, but their cousin. Yet children adapt quickly to new truths, and Arya found it brilliant that Jon might be a prince, while Sansa fretted over the scandal of it all, uncertain how it might affect her own betrothal prospects. Meanwhile, across the sea, exiled Targaryen loyalists whispered of this new development. The rumored son of Rhaegar, recognized by Eddard Stark and grudgingly spared by Robert. Some, such as the beggar king Viserys Targaryen and his sister Daenerys, heard the news from Bravos or Pentos. Confusion and jealousy roiled in Viserys' veins. If this Jon truly was Rhaegar's heir, what did that make him? Another pretender to the legacy he believed was his? Daenerys, still a girl, felt a flicker of hope that perhaps they had family left in Westeros, that they were not alone. The ripples of Ned's revelation were not contained to the Seven Kingdoms. They spread across the narrow sea as well, sowing new seeds of chaos. Yet for all that, life continued, feasts were held, decisions made. The king's hunts ventured out to the Kingswood. The realm's daily business refused to halt simply because a Targaryen heir had emerged. Jon spent his time training in the yard with the Stark guards or with Syrio Farrell, who sometimes offered him the same fluid swordsmanship lessons he gave Arya. He discovered that some part of him relished the dance of steel, as if the martial blood of House Targaryen and House Stark both flowed fiercely in his veins. At times, Ned watched him with pride and sadness. Perhaps in another life, Jon might have simply been a gifted swordsman of House Stark, or even joined the Night's Watches he had once planned. But that simpler path was forever lost. Robert's vigilance did not wane. He assigned men of the King's Guard to keep an eye on Jon's movements, and spies whispered of any conversation Jon had with foreign envoys or with potential conspirators. The king grew more sullen and withdrawn by the day. He drank even more heavily, avoided his queen's bed. Rumors said he found companionship among the city's brothels instead, and snapped at his counselors. Tension erupted between him and Cersei, who saw an opportunity in Robert's emotional turmoil to push her own children forward. Joffrey's hostility toward Jon deepened with each passing day. The atmosphere in the Red Keep was a coiled spring, and a single reckless act might have triggered open bloodshed. Then, on a crisp morning, a raven arrived bearing dire news. A band of mercenaries had been caught outside the city walls, apparently on a mission to abduct or kill Jon Targaryen. Captured men confessed to being in the pay of an unnamed lord who wanted the Targaryen bloodline erased. Speculation ran wild. Was it Tywin Lannister? Some other powerful figure? The city reeled. Robert's alarm flared, for he saw that any attempt on Jon's life could be blamed on the crown, igniting a new rebellion. Robert had sworn publicly to spare the boy. If unknown assassins succeeded, who would believe that Robert was not involved? Fear of civil unrest forced his hand. In a dramatic council session, Robert stood and announced that Jon Targaryen, so he named him, would be recognized as a ward of the crown. He would remain in the Red Keep under royal protection to ensure no harm befell him, but he would not be named heir. "Let the realm see we are merciful," Robert declared in a loud voice, though his expression was a thunderhead. "I deny him the throne, but I shall not be his murderer. I will show the realm that I am a true king, not a butcher. Any who would do him harm must face me." Ned saw that Robert had little love for Jon, yet recognized the precariousness of the situation. If Jon were harmed, the blame would surely fall upon the king. Better to keep Jon close, apparently under Robert's protection, than to let him roam free, gathering alliances. The king's official recognition of Jon's safety gave at least some respite from the immediate threat. But it also meant Jon was trapped in King's Landing, a golden cage of sorts. Ned was furious, yet saw no alternative that would keep Jon safe from the ever-growing web of conspiracies. Jon struggled with conflicting emotions: gratitude at not being executed, resentment at being a captive in all but name. He confided in Arya that he hated the courtesy and the stares, hated the knowledge that every move he made was reported to the king. He told her that some nights he dreamt of running away to the Wall to join the Night's Watch, but recognized that he could never again be simply a nameless man in black. The realm knew his face now, knew his claim. Even on the Wall, that legacy would haunt him. Arya listened solemnly, her dark eyes reflecting compassion. "You're still my brother," she told him fiercely. "No matter whose blood runs in your veins." The words comforted him more than she would ever know. As the moon turned, the shock across Westeros slowly settled. The realm realized that Robert Baratheon would not yield the throne, nor would he allow open harm to the boy. The lords took stock, some toyed with secret letters to Jon, pledging support if he ever declared himself rightful king. Others reaffirmed their loyalty to House Baratheon, dismissing Jon as a figurehead without dragons or power. The small folk, as always, just prayed to the Seven that they might avoid another devastating war. Ned Stark, for his part, tried to guide Jon as best he could, while also sending missives to Winterfell to keep Catelyn and Robb abreast of developments. He dreaded the day when he would have to return north without Jon. But the king insisted that for now, Jon remain in King's Landing under the crown's direct supervision. Jon lived day to day under the uneasy arrangement. He tried not to draw attention, focusing on his swordsmanship and his reading, occasionally exchanging letters with Robb, Bran, and Rickon at Winterfell. But the city was restless. People whispered about the second coming of the dragons. The Targaryen sigil appeared graffitied on a few walls, fueling rumors of a secret uprising. Through it all, Robert's resentment festered like an untended wound. The king drank more, feasted more, indulged in hunting as an escape. Cersei seethed with frustration, for she sensed the realm's attention drifting from her golden-haired children to the Targaryen boy, and she mistrusted Ned Stark's every move. Eventually, a friction point was reached. One evening, Robert confronted Ned in his solar after too many cups of wine, demanding to know why he should continue to coddle the tea. "Targaryen, I should have ended him as a babe, Ned," Robert slurred, pacing the chamber in agitation. "All these damn Targaryens, someone always tries to crawl back, claim the throne. If your sister hadn't tied my hands," he trailed off, eyes red. "Lyanna. Gods, I loved her. And she ran off with that silver-haired scoundrel Rhaegar. If not for that, none of this would be happening." He threw his wine cup across the room, splattering the stone wall with red. Ned held himself still. The king's grief and rage simmered side by side. "That scoundrel fathered your nephew, Robert," Ned said quietly. "Hatred will not bring Lyanna back. Killing Jon will only plunge the realm into chaos. You must see that by now." Robert sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. He was a man who had once been bold and vital, but now worn down by years of ruling and by regrets that clung to him like chains. "The realm sees me as merciful, they say," he murmured. "But all I want is to be free of this burden. Jon Targaryen, he is a living reminder of all I lost." He looked up at Ned with a rawness that cut deeper than any scorn. "I don't know how to live with that." Ned had no easy answer. He stepped forward and placed a hand on Robert's shoulder. "We must do our duty, Robert," he said. "That is all any of us can do." Across the castle, Jon was in his chamber, unsettled by the same nightmares that had plagued him for nights now, images of a great battle, a swirl of fiery dragons overhead, knights clashing, blood running red on the trident. He dreamt that he stood at the center of it all, sword in hand, uncertain whether he should fight for the Targaryen banner or flee from it. He awoke drenched in sweat, hearing the distant horns of the city watch. Outside, the night lay thick. He could not return to sleep. Instead, he dressed, belted on his sword, and slipped through the corridors. He had found that a quiet walk sometimes cleared his head. Shadows flickered along the walls, cast by guttering torches. As he passed an intersection, he noticed a figure in the gloom, Peter Baelish, leaning casually against the stone. "Out late, my boy?" Baelish said, his tone just above a whisper, a small smirk tugging at his lips. "Forgive me, my prince." Jon's jaw tightened. He disliked Baelish's serpent-like manner, his eyes ever calculating. "I needed some air," Jon said coolly. "Is that a crime?" "Certainly not," Baelish replied. "I was enjoying a late stroll myself, admiring the architecture. The Red Keep has so many secrets, wouldn't you agree?" He gave Jon a measured look, the kind that suggested he was sifting for advantage. "I must say, your presence here has set quite the cat among the pigeons. Half the realm wonders if you'll wake one day and declare yourself king. The other half wonders if you'll be quietly disposed of. I suppose that leaves you somewhere in the middle, uncertain which path you'll be forced down." Jon suppressed a flash of anger. "I have no interest in your games, Lord Baelish. I only want to live my life without being a puppet in anyone's play." Baelish's smirk turned into a thin, knowing grin. "Oh, my dear boy, we are all puppets at some point, dancing on strings. The only difference is who holds those strings. Perhaps you believe that your strings remain in your own hands. But the world of lords and kings is not so simple. If I were you, I'd seek every advantage I could find. Allies, resources, knowledge. Because sooner or later, someone will force your hand. I'd wager my last gold dragon on that." He pushed off the wall, gave Jon a mocking bow, and disappeared into the darkness. Jon watched him go, skin crawling with unease. The man's words rang in his ears. Allies, resources, knowledge. Part of Jon feared the truth. He might not have the luxury of remaining neutral forever. If factions formed around him, if rebellions simmered, if Robert's threats grew too sharp, Jon would have to act or be destroyed. Ned had taught him about duty, but never had Jon dreamed that duty might include fighting for a throne he never wanted. Days bled into weeks, and winter's edge crept closer, though in King's Landing winter was mild, more a shift of cool rains than snows. Rumors circulated that Tywin Lannister was gathering forces in the west for reasons unknown. Dorne whispered about old grievances. The Tyrells remained cagey, hosting lavish feasts and making polite noises about loyalty to Robert, while discreetly sending envoys to gauge Jon's leanings. The realm's tapestry was pulled taut, every thread straining. Then, on a gray afternoon, Ned Stark's guards returned from a mission outside the city walls with a group of battered knights who had been ambushed by brigands. One of those knights carried a sealed parchment from Howland Reed of the Neck, the man who had stood with Ned in the Tower of Joy. The letter confirmed, in detail, the marriage between Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen, witnessed by a secret septon, and the birth of Jon. The letter was addressed to the king, stating in unambiguous terms that this was truth, not rumor. It might have been the final piece of evidence needed for any who still doubted Ned's words. Robert read it in stony silence during a council session, then handed it to Varys without a word. The spider read it, gave a tiny sigh, and said, "It appears there is no doubt, Your Grace. The boy truly is the blood of the dragon, and the wolf." Robert glared at the letter as if it had offended him personally. At last, he tossed it aside. "Very well," he said. "Let it be known throughout the 7 kingdoms that Jon Snow is Jon Targaryen, the child of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, recognized as such by the crown but not as heir. If any man says otherwise, let him come face me in open court." With that pronouncement, the final barrier of doubt was erased. Jon was now publicly, undeniably Targaryen in name and blood. And Robert's determination to deny him the Iron Throne was equally clear. The realm shuddered at the sense of 2 forces in uneasy balance, like tectonic plates that might eventually collide. Now everyone knew precisely who Jon was, and precisely how Robert meant to handle him. Over the next few months, the tenuous peace held, though tension crackled. Jon remained in the Red Keep under constant watch. He sparred under the sun in the training yard, endured the cold glances of certain courtiers, formed a careful, uneasy friendship with some members of the Kingsguard, most notably Barristan Selmy, who saw something of Rhaegar's calm in Jon's bearing. He wrote to Robb and Bran, telling them that he missed Winterfell desperately and that he longed for the north. He had to rely upon Ned's counsel to navigate the day-to-day rituals of court life. Robert, for his part, kept his distance, though occasionally summoned Jon to stand before him, as if to remind him who truly wore the crown. Meanwhile, the realm's gossip turned to other matters. The negotiations with the Iron Bank, the question of a possible new war in the Stepstones, the wedding plans for Sansa Stark and Joffrey Baratheon, which Cersei pressed forward with renewed urgency to secure alliances. But beneath it all, the revelation of Jon's parentage left a fault line running through the politics of Westeros. Many sensed that one day, perhaps years from now, that fault line might quake into open conflict, especially if Robert died before forging a stable succession. Joffrey was next in line, but Joffrey was widely disliked, and rumors abounded that he might not even be Robert's trueborn son. Quietly, some lords began to hedge their bets, reaching out to the young Targaryen who lingered in the Red Keep like an ember that refused to die. For Jon, each day was a test of patience, humility, and resolve. He had always been an outsider, and here he was doubly so. A Targaryen among Baratheons, a northerner among southern courtiers, a boy raised in the ways of House Stark but carrying the name of House Targaryen. Despite the swirling danger, a part of him felt stronger, more self-assured. He was a product of two great lines, the dragon and the wolf. Perhaps he could forge a path that honored both. When he prayed in the Godswood, kneeling before the lone weirwood that stood transplanted and stunted in the southern climate, he felt a flicker of connection to his Stark heritage, to the north. When he studied the Targaryen texts, he sensed an echo of Rhaegar's solemn pride. And so the world turned. Summer crept onward, though the promise of winter lurked. Far away, Dothraki hordes thundered across the grasslands. Braavosi bankers tallied coins, and beyond the narrow sea, exiled Targaryens and would-be conquerors stirred. Here, in King's Landing, the seat of power, two men, Robert Baratheon and Jon Targaryen, lived in a forced proximity, each reminding the other of an unfinished story. And Ned Stark, haunted by Lyanna's memory, bore witness, hoping beyond hope that this precarious peace would hold. Sometimes, late at night, Jon would climb to a tower balcony and gaze upon the city. He would close his eyes and imagine the roar of dragon wings overhead, the hush of winter snows in the courtyard of Winterfell. He would picture a world where love had not been sundered by duty, where Rhaegar and Lyanna had lived and he was born into open acceptance. But that was not this world. Here, the Iron Throne stood, a seat forged of 1,000 swords, offering both glory and destruction. He did not know if he would ever try to claim it. But in his veins, the blood of the dragon and the wolf ran strong. If fate demanded he choose a path someday, he would do so in Lyanna's name and for the sake of the realm she had entrusted to Ned Stark's keeping. Such thoughts gave him purpose, a sense of quiet determination. Whatever happened, he would face it with the honor taught to him by the Starks and the half-remembered valor of House Targaryen. The realm might quake, but he would stand his ground. He was Jon Targaryen, born of ice and fire, recognized by a king who both feared and spared him. The time for destiny might lie ahead, but for now he lived in the precarious present, forging a path none could have foreseen when Ned Stark first rode from the Tower of Joy, carrying a silent infant and a secret that would one day shape the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. And so ended this beginning of a new saga in Westeros, the day when Eddard Stark dared to speak the truth of Jon's parentage in the courtyard of the Red Keep, forcing Robert to acknowledge Rhaegar's son as a living heir. The realm would never be quite the same. The dragons were gone, or so men had believed, but a single ember had survived in the form of a quiet, watchful youth. And in the years to come, the question of what that ember might ignite would trouble many a lord's dreams and shape the songs yet to be sung. Jon Targaryen woke on the morning of his 16th name day to the distant toll of bells from the great September of Baelor. The heavy timbre of bronze rang across King's Landing, echoing through the Red Keep's corridors. Outside his narrow window, the sky was a sullen gray, as though it, too, was uncertain whether to weep with rain or simply brood. He lay there for a long while, listening to the bells reverberate, trying to imagine what it would be like if he had never learned the truth of his name, if he still thought himself Jon Snow, the lonely bastard of Winterfell. Too proud to whine but too aware of being an outsider among the trueborn Starks. And then he recalled that the realm knew him now as Jon Targaryen, recognized in blood but not in inheritance, forcibly kept in King's Landing under King Robert's watchful eye. With a sigh, he pushed aside the thin blanket, rose, and dressed quickly in garments that bore no sigil. Plain breeches of dark gray, a black doublet, and boots that had seen better days. Before, he might have missed the layered warmth of Winterfell's halls, that sense of a north he could call his own despite the label snow. Here, though, everything felt alien. Even after months in King's Landing, the muggy southern air, the spice smells drifting up from Flea Bottom, the constant stir of conflict all around him, none of it felt like home. He fastened his sword belt and stepped out into the corridor, where Ser Barristan Selmy waited, leaning lightly on the stone wall as if he had stood guard all night. "You're early, Ser Barristan," Jon remarked in a low voice, still thick with sleep. The old knight inclined his head. His snow-white hair and lined face spoke of decades of service, first to House Targaryen, then to King Robert. "I offered to escort you to the yards, my prince." Jon grimaced. "I've told you, I'm no prince. The king refuses me that style, and it's better that way." Barristan's gaze flickered with something akin to fondness. "Once I served a Targaryen prince whom many called the realm's bright star. I won't argue with you if you claim you're not here to stake your rights, but you are the son of Rhaegar Targaryen, and that is a truth I cannot unsee. Indulge this old man in at least a show of courtesy, so that I may protect the last living scion of a house I once pledged my sword to." Jon understood the deeper meaning behind Barristan's words. House Targaryen was all but gone, yet Barristan's sense of honor kept him bound to the memory of Rhaegar. Even though he wore the white cloak of the Kingsguard sworn to Robert Baratheon, Barristan had made clear, in his quiet way, that he respected Jon's heritage. "Very well," Jon said. "Though I prefer to walk these halls without fanfare. I have enough eyes on me already." Barristan replied with a mild bow. "You'll have my sword should you need it." They crossed the echoing corridors, past flickering torches that illuminated the worn stone. When they reached the open air, a pale sun was struggling behind a veil of clouds. The Red Keep's practice yard was already bustling with men-at-arms, pages running messages, and a few knights and squires eager to hone their skills before the day's duties. Jon glimpsed the hulking form of Sandor Clegane at one corner, scowling at a trio of gold cloaks who were practicing with short spears. Farther off, a cluster of watchers included a couple of minor courtiers, eyes sharp for any gossip that might arise. No doubt they'd notice every tilt of Jon's head, every stance he took with his sword. He gave Barristan a small nod, then set about warming his muscles, drawing Longclaw from its sheath. Longclaw was a bastard sword of Valyrian steel, one that once belonged to House Mormont, but had been gifted to him by Lord Commander Jeor Mormont when Jon had briefly thought to join the Night's Watch. That future never materialized after his parentage was revealed. Still, the sword remained with him, a reminder of the North, of oaths that now felt more like a dream than a possible path. The first few swings cut the air with a faint whir, the blade's dark ripples glinting when the sun briefly broke through the cloud cover. Jon worked his footwork, shifting between the stances Ser Roderick Castle had taught him in Winterfell's courtyard years before, back when he'd worn a thick wool cloak against the biting winds. Here, in the mild climate, the sweat came easily, beads sliding down his temples. He was aware of watchers, but he blocked them out, focusing on the arc of each stroke, the angle of each parry. Barristan stood aside, occasionally offering a word of constructive critique, praising the speed of Jon's reactions or pointing out a moment's imbalance in his stance. Eventually, Jon lowered his sword, breathing hard, half expecting the faint applause from those idle onlookers who found amusement in the Targaryen youth's daily training. But the watchers were already dispersing, leaving only a handful of them. Sandor Clegane barked something at the gold cloaks, ignoring Jon. Jon felt that at least one set of eyes remained fixed on him, though. He turned and saw a slight figure in a neat doublet of green and gold. Peter Baelish. Littlefinger offered a small wave, lips twisted in a half-smile, then slipped away before Jon could address him. That was typical of Baelish. He seldom confronted Jon directly, yet always seemed to be quietly searching for angles. Jon wiped his brow and gave Barristan a look. "You'll want to watch him," Barristan murmured. "Lord Baelish has been climbing these walls for many years, though you won't see calluses on his hands. He's dangerous in his own way, the sort who wields secrets like swords." Jon nodded. "I can feel him lurking. But let him lurk. I'm not playing his games." "I hope for your sake you're right," Barristan said. "Come, we should find some breakfast. I believe Lord Stark returns from council soon." At the mention of Ned Stark, Jon felt a surge of gratitude and worry in equal measure. Ned was still in King's Landing, still a reluctant occupant of these corridors, bound by Robert's insistence that the Northern Warden remain close for council. Everyone knew it was partly to keep an eye on Ned, who might muster Northern swords if Jon's claim became more than talk. Jon hated that Ned was forced to endure the intrigues of the Southern Court, missing Catelyn and his children in Winterfell. But Ned remained stoic, as always. They left the yard and crossed into the keep's main halls, the vaulted ceilings overhead making their footsteps echo. Servants scurried past with trays of bread and fruit. The smell of freshly cut melons mingled with the ever-present stench of the city's waste carried on the breeze. Barristan parted ways with Jon, heading to the barracks to inspect the younger knights, while Jon turned a corner, passing under a colonnade that overlooked the sea. The wind off Blackwater Bay ruffled his dark hair. Then a familiar voice called from behind, Arya Stark, bounding toward him with a quick grin, her gray eyes shining. She was clad in breeches and a loose tunic, having no patience for skirts or formal garb. She had grown taller over these many months, her hair cropped short. Though she was Ned's daughter, her scruffy appearance earned disapproval from some of the ladies at court. Jon, however, took comfort in her rebellious spirit. It was a reminder of a simpler time, before the secrets, before King's Landing overshadowed their lives. "Jon," Arya said, beaming, "I've been looking all over for you. Did you see me in the yard earlier?" He managed a small laugh. "I was busy swinging a sword, but I'm sure I heard some scuffle. Was that you besting one of the squires again?" Arya wrinkled her nose. "They never want to truly spar with me because I'm a girl, so I have to trick them. Syrio says a water dancer uses all advantages. One of them threw me in the dirt, so I kicked him." He started whining that it wasn't fair. As if bigger boys beating on younger girls is somehow fair. Jon couldn't help but smile. "You remind me of the fierce dire wolves in the north. I'm glad you haven't let this place tame you." Arya's eyes darted about and she lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Father's back from council." He seemed upset. "I think something happened, something about Lannister gold, or maybe shipping lines." He wouldn't say, but I can tell he's worried. That set Jon's nerves on edge. Ned usually tried to keep a calm demeanor, but ever since the revelation of Jon's parentage, he had grown more solemn. If something had shaken him at the council, it could be important indeed. "Let's find him," Jon suggested. They walked together through the corridors, eventually reaching Ned's solar in a quiet wing of the Red Keep. Two Stark guardsmen with dire wolf sigils on their tabards stood at the door. They bowed their heads and allowed Jon and Arya inside. Eddard Stark sat at a heavy wooden table piled with parchments. Though he was still a tall, imposing figure in well-maintained leathers, a few more lines seemed etched into his face lately, signs of worry. Nearby, Sansa hovered, looking both concerned and exasperated. She was dressed in a lovely pastel gown, her auburn hair arranged in a style that many southern ladies admired. Yet the tension in her posture suggested she'd been arguing with Ned. At the sight of Jon and Arya, Sansa's expression softened. She offered a tentative smile. She still struggled with addressing Jon now that his parentage was known. They had grown up as siblings in Winterfell, but the knowledge that he was in truth her cousin, and a Targaryen at that, left her uncertain how to behave. She had been taught all her life that Targaryens were usurped for their madness. Yet Jon was the same person she had known, or so she tried to tell herself. "Jon," Ned said quietly. "Good timing. I hope to speak with you soon." He took a breath. "I've just come from the council. Robert is adamant about hosting a grand melee at the end of the moon's turn. He hopes to quell tensions by entertaining the small folk and giving the knights something other than rumors to focus on." Arya perked up. "A melee? Swords and lances and the like?" Ned nodded. "He wants a show of martial prowess. Lords and knights from all over the 7 kingdoms will attend, and it's to be held outside the city walls with a grand festival. Wine, feasting, the works. Robert believes that if the people are distracted by spectacle, they'll be less inclined to dwell on talk of rebellions and Targaryen claims." He paused, looking at Jon. "He specifically requested that you participate in some manner. Not necessarily to fight, but at least to be present on display, as it were." Jon felt an uncomfortable clench in his stomach. Why? So everyone can gawk at the Targaryen pup? Ned glanced at Sansa, then Arya, then back to Jon. Robert wants to prove that he has no fear of you, that you live under his protection and are not raising an army behind closed doors. He hopes that showing you in public unguarded will let people see that there is no imminent war. Besides, he still fancies himself a champion. If you were to stand near him at the jousting grounds, it would signal that you're not his enemy. Arya folded her arms, clearly disgruntled. Why should Jon have to bow and scrape? The king should be the one apologizing for all those years he would have had Jon killed if he'd known the truth. Sansa frowned in that prim way she had. Arya, hush. We must do our duty. Father's right, if this is what the king wants, we have to be practical. We don't want another rebellion, do we? Arya rolled her eyes, but Ned reached out gently to squeeze her shoulder. I understand your frustration, Arya, but this is the situation we're in. I don't want open conflict in the realm, not when winter looms and when the scars of Robert's rebellion still ache in so many hearts. Jon listened, his mind whirling with possibilities. A grand melee would gather knights from across the 7 kingdoms and invite all manner of courtesy visits, alliances, and hidden scheming. It was the perfect opportunity for some to curry favor with the king or to approach Jon with hidden proposals. I'll do it, he said at last, voice subdued. If it keeps the peace, I'll stand by Robert and let them see that I'm not plotting to overthrow him. Ned's relief was evident. Thank you, he said. I'll see to it that your presence is well received. He paused, then added in a softer tone, stay vigilant. Even in a festival, danger can lurk. If word is out that you'll be there, any enemy who wants you dead might seize the chance. I'll be careful, Jon promised. And I have Ser Barristan watching over me. Arya opened her mouth as if to volunteer herself as well, but Sansa interjected, we'll all be watching, I'm sure. Father, do you think the queen will try to overshadow us all with her own pageantry? Ned's mouth tightened slightly. It's likely. Cersei Lannister has a flair for spectacle and she wants the realm to remember that her son Joffrey is the heir, not any Targaryen. He glanced at Jon. I suspect part of this is to put you in your place, so to speak. She'll ensure Joffrey is at the forefront, wearing the finest raiment. Jon felt a surge of distaste for Joffrey's arrogant, sneering face, but he stifled the feeling. Then let him. If it helps keep me alive and the realm steady, I'll endure his posturing. Arya muttered something about wanting to skewer Joffrey, which earned her a chiding look from Sansa. But Ned gave Arya a wry half-smile as if acknowledging he sometimes shared the sentiment. They spoke a little longer, arranging the details. Sansa wanted to design her own gown with subtle northern flourishes. Arya declared that she'd prefer to watch the fights from some vantage point where she could see each blow, and Ned carefully explained that they all had to be mindful of the king's pleasure. Through it all, Jon's thoughts kept drifting to the deeper meaning. The festival might be a stage for some faction to publicly test the waters of Targaryen support. After all, the crown had admitted his parentage was real. Some lords might wish to curry favor with him, either as a hedge against Robert or for the day Robert's health finally failed. A week later, the ground outside King's Landing came alive with color and noise. Wooden stands were erected around a wide field, banners fluttered in the breeze, and vendors set up their stalls offering wine, mead, roasted meats, honey cakes, and other treats. Knights and lords pitched their pavilions, each trying to outdo the other in splendor. Tents of crimson and gold, of emerald and white, of blue and silver ringed the edges of the field. If one closed one's eyes, one might almost imagine a peaceful realm where men gathered simply to enjoy justs and feasts rather than brood over the possibility of war. Jon arrived early, dressed in plain black and gray with the subtle gold and red pin of House Targaryen upon his breast. Ned had suggested he wear at least a small token acknowledging that side of his heritage, lest some suspicious onlooker think he was hiding or ashamed. The pin was small enough not to draw excessive attention, but to those who looked closely, it was undeniable, the 3-headed dragon of House Targaryen, wrought in gold, in subtle contrast to his otherwise somber attire. Standing atop a small platform to the side of the tilting grounds, Jon surveyed the bustle. King Robert was nearby, seated on a makeshift dais with the royal family. Cersei wore green and gold silks that complemented her hair, while Joffrey seemed practically draped in Lannister lions. Myrcella and Tommen sat on either side, looking a bit bored but also excited for the day's entertainments. To Robert's other side stood Renly Baratheon in flamboyant attire, laughing with a cluster of young companions, and next to him loomed Ser Barristan, stoic and watchful. The king, for his part, seemed in good spirits. He'd had enough wine to flush his cheeks, but not so much as to render him unsteady. He gave a hearty guffaw when a pair of jesters tumbled by. Jon could feel the occasional flick of Robert's eyes in his direction. As if the king were reminding himself that Jon was there, the Targaryen boy standing calmly, unarmed save for a ceremonial dagger at his hip. Indeed, Robert had insisted that Jon not carry Longclaw into the festival, though Ned had negotiated that the blade could remain in a tent under guard. No sense giving the small folk any illusions, the king had grumbled. Looking around, Jon recognized various houses. The Tyrells had arrived in force, with Marjorie Tyrell present alongside her grandmother, the Queen of Thorns, as well as Loras Tyrell, the famed Knight of Flowers, resplendent in shining armor. The Martells had sent representatives, though Prince Doran himself did not come. He dispatched his son, Quentyn, who mingled with a small retinue from Dorne. Some minor lords wore House Targaryen tokens, a quiet but deliberate show of sympathy, yet they remained cautious, making no overt declarations. As the heralds announced the beginning of the justs, horns blared, and men in polished plate led their horses to the lists. The crowd cheered, flags rippled, and King Robert bellowed in approval. "That's it, lads," Jon heard him cry. "Break a lance or two." For a time, the atmosphere was almost jolly, with knights saluting the king and performing feats to impress the gathered crowd. One by one, they competed, the clang of lances, the splinters of wood, the roaring approval or disappointed groans as each tilt played out. Jon watched with mixed feelings, standing with Ned and his half-sisters. He saw Loras Tyrell unhorse 3 opponents with graceful ease, the crowd chanting Knight of Flowers. Another tilt saw Bronn, and up jumped Selsword, rumor said, besting a minor Stormlands knight. Cheers rang out for the king's own champion, a broad-chested knight in antler-crested helm, who triumphed over one of Lord Hightower's men. Through it all, Jon clapped politely, but remained overshadowed by the dais on which Robert sat. After the initial rounds of jousting, there was to be a melee on foot for the braver warriors. The dais was adjusted so that the king could stand and watch from a good vantage point, while participants arrayed themselves in a wide circle. Armor glinted in the midday sun. Some knights brandished steel swords, dulled at the tip but still capable of harm. Others carried axes or warhammers. It was a chaotic affair, with alliances forming and dissolving in moments. The rules stated that a man was out if he yielded or was knocked unconscious, and the last standing would claim the victor's purse. Jon observed from behind a railing. At his side was Arya, who had managed to worm her way past the guards. Sansa stood a short distance away, flanked by 2 of her ladies-in-waiting, wearing a tense expression as if she feared the violence would become too real. Ned was speaking quietly with a pair of Northern bannermen who'd come to witness the event, but Jon noticed the uneasy lines on Ned's face. Something about the swirl of courtiers or the half-hidden glances from certain lords unsettled him. When the horn blared, the melee began. Men charged, steel clashed, and the crowd roared. Dust rose in swirling clouds. A pair of brawny knights turned on one unfortunate hedge knight, sending him sprawling. Farther off, a Dornish champion in orange and red hammered relentlessly at a squire from the Vale, who finally yielded. For a time, it was a cacophony of screams and cheers, the ring of blades echoing across the field. Then the focus shifted to a confrontation near the center, where Sandor Clegane, the Hound, had entered despite initially claiming he had no interest. Facing him was a tall, muscular man wearing the sigil of House Tarly on his shield. It was a brutal exchange, sword crashing into shield, neither man yielding ground. The Hound's skill and savage approach gradually overmatched the Tarly knight, and soon the man stumbled, shield shattered. In a swift motion, Sandor slammed him to the ground. The man yielded, groaning. The crowd let out a chorus of cheers, but also some gasps at the violence. Jon turned to Arya. "That one is done for." Arya nodded, eyes shining with a strange excitement. "The Hound's unstoppable in open combat. I'd like to spar with him, though I'd probably end up battered." Jon managed a smirk. "We can arrange that if you're set on losing an arm." Before Arya could retort, a sudden hush fell. The crowd's cries were replaced by a collective intake of breath. Jon looked back to see what had changed. Into the fray, from the opposite side of the field, a knight in black armor had entered late, as if making a dramatic arrival. A visor concealed his face, but the armor bore a dragon motif, black plate with subtle ridges reminiscent of scaled wings. The surcoat was dark crimson with a three-headed dragon embroidered in gold thread, House Targaryen's sigil. The watchers murmured in confusion. Where had he come from? Who bore those arms now that the Targaryens were supposedly extinct? Jon felt a jolt of shock. He had not arranged this. He'd never seen this man before. Yet here stood a knight wearing Targaryen colors that were far too reminiscent of Rhaegar's. Tension rippled through the assembled crowd. Even King Robert, who had been leaning forward to watch the melee, went very still. Jon could see the king's face reddening in anger or perhaps fear. The black-armored knight strode into the fray, raising a sword that gleamed in the sun. One of the remaining combatants rushed him with a warhammer, but the Targaryen knight sidestepped gracefully and whirled, smashing his pommel into the man's helm. The man toppled. Another leapt at him, only to be disarmed in 2 sweeping strokes. It happened so swiftly that the crowd erupted in startled cries. A swirl of cloak, a flash of steel, another man out. Whoever this knight was, he was dangerous indeed. Jon's heart pounded. He risked a glance at Ned, whose eyes were narrow. Then he looked up at Robert upon the dais. The king's jaw was clenched, lips drawn tight. Cersei hissed something in his ear, but Robert shook her off. Joffrey stood, arms crossed, glaring down at the Black Knight as though personally offended. In the melee pit, the Targaryen knight felled another opponent, sending him crashing to the ground. Only a handful of men remained. Sandor Clegane turned toward him, baring his teeth in a silent snarl. The hound advanced warily, aware that here was a foe worth caution. Around them, the other knights hung back, unsure if they should band together or fight one another as the melee rules intended. The Black Knight did not hesitate. He closed the distance with speed, unleashing a flurry of strikes. Sandor blocked or parried most, but one blow slipped through, cutting a line across the hound's left pauldron. The crowd gasped. Sandor roared and swung his sword in a savage arc, aiming to smash through the Black Knight's defense. Yet the Black Knight twisted aside, letting the blow clang off his left vambrace, then slammed Sandor in the chest with a mailed fist. The hound staggered, and the Black Knight followed with a precise cut that knocked Sandor's sword from his hand. Sandor's face contorted with rage. He tried to grapple, but the Black Knight whirled behind him and struck the back of Sandor's knee with the flat of his blade. The hound collapsed onto one leg. For a moment, it seemed he might lose consciousness, but he gritted his teeth and swung a desperate punch. The Black Knight grabbed Sandor's wrist, twisted, and pinned him. One heartbeat later, the cold steel of the Black Knight's sword was pressed lightly to Sandor's neck. It happened so fast that even the heralds hesitated, uncertain if the hound would yield. In the hush, the Black Knight's voice rang out, slightly muffled behind his visor, "Yield." Sandor Clegane spat in the dirt, eyes burning. But he had no choice. The herald boomed, "Sir Sandor Clegane yields." An explosion of murmurs and gasps cascaded through the stands. The Black Knight lowered his sword, stepping back. Now only a couple of battered fighters lingered, but they exchanged uncertain glances, then threw down their weapons in surrender. Clearly, none wished to face the Black Knight alone. The herald roared, "The victor, who reveals himself as." The Black Knight turned in a slow circle, acknowledging the onlookers. Then he raised his visor. He was lean and dark-haired, with a thin scar along his jaw. Jon did not recognize him, but the crowd strained forward. Some whispered names, references to lesser branches of House Targaryen from generations past, but such lines were said to be snuffed out. The man's eyes flicked to Robert, then to Jon. A hush descended, pregnant with suspense. "I claim no name but the Knight of the Dragon," the man declared, his voice carrying across the field. "Yet I wear these colors in honor of true kings who once brought unity to Westeros. I claim the champion's purse, and with it I declare my loyalty to the rightful blood of the dragon. May the realm know that the Targaryen line endures in Jon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar." A collective gasp echoed. A ripple of alarm flashed across Robert's face, replaced by anger. Cersei's lips curled in fury. Joffrey, eyes blazing, cried, "Treason!" Some knights drew swords, uncertain if they were to seize the Black Knight or not. The king's voice thundered, "Seize him." But the Knight of the Dragon, as he styled himself, sprang backward, threw down a small spherical object, a smoke bomb of some kind, and vanished in a swirl of gray haze. The crowd erupted into pandemonium. Guards ran forward, pushing through the melee field in confusion. By the time the smoke cleared, the Black Knight was gone, leaving only a scattering of battered men and swirling dust. The stands seethed with noise, people shouting, craning their necks. Jon stood frozen. The man had just publicly declared loyalty to him by name. That was precisely the kind of spectacle Robert had feared, a blatant sign that some in the realm wanted a Targaryen restoration. Up on the dais, Robert was bellowing orders for the gold cloaks to find the Black Knight. Cersei looked livid, gesturing sharply to the king's guard. Ned hurried over to Jon, worry carved into every line of his face. Arya stared wide-eyed while Sansa covered her mouth in shock. What in the seven hells was that? Ned hissed under his breath. Did you have any contact with the so-called Knight of the Dragon? Jon shook his head, his heart racing. None. I've never seen him in my life. He must be one of the Targaryen loyalists who's been lurking in the shadows. I swear I had no part in this. Ned put a calming hand on Jon's shoulder. I believe you. But many will not. We must find a way to pacify Robert before he does something rash. At that moment, Robert stormed over, cheeks purple with rage. Guards flanked him, hands on their weapons. The king glowered at Jon as though he were personally responsible for the fiasco. Damn you, boy, he snarled. This is what I warned about. Targaryen trouble. Did you put him up to this? Jon straightened, forcing himself not to show fear. No, your grace. I have no idea who he was. I do not welcome this. Robert's hand clenched on the hilt of his warhammer, an echo of the old days when he had worn armor and led armies against Rhaegar Targaryen. I should have you locked in the black cells until I wring the truth out of you, he growled, but a flicker of conflict shone in his eyes. He had promised himself that he would not be the butcher. Ned stepped forward, voice measured. Your grace, you know Jon would not stage such a spectacle. He's been under guard with no chance to meet any conspirators. The man sought to cause precisely this chaos. He invoked Jon's name to sow fear. Let's not give him what he wants by turning on each other. For a moment, Robert looked as though he might strike Ned. Then the tension ebbed slightly, replaced by a grim frustration. Where's Ser Barristan? Where are the gold cloaks? Find that Black Knight, bring him to me alive or dead, he roared. This day's entertainment is over. The king turned on his heel and stomped away. The melee field emptied in a wave of confusion and dismay. Guards hustled about, searching for any sign of the fugitive knight. Trumpets blared, signifying the abrupt end of the festival. Townsfolk and lesser lords alike began to file back toward the city gates, half terrified, half thrilled by the drama they had just witnessed. Jon followed Ned and the Stark guards as they returned to the Red Keep. The mood was foul. The king's men glared at Jon as if suspecting him of hidden treachery. Cersei's ladies whispered behind their hands, shooting venomous looks his way. Joffrey sneered openly. In a single day, the progress Jon had made towards seeming harmless was undone by one masked man proclaiming Targaryen loyalty. That night, in Ned's solar, a meeting convened. Present were Ned Stark, Ser Barristan, Peter Baelish, Varys, and Jon himself. Robert had refused to speak to Jon for the moment, instead sending the Hand and the Council to extract the truth. Varys, robed in pale yellow, fluttered his hands apologetically. We are quite sure the Knight of the Dragon slipped away on a fast horse. The gold cloaks found no trace of him in the city, nor in the camps outside the walls. Either he's hidden very well, or he's had outside help. Baelish offered one of his faint smiles. I suspect the same. He might have friends in the city. He certainly had the gold for that splendid set of armor. It's a rather theatrical gesture, wouldn't you say? Appearing in Targaryen regalia, then vanishing in smoke. Ser Barristan frowned, arms folded. A dishonorable tactic, but effective. He made a statement that everyone will remember. The rumors will spread like wildfire. Ned turned to Jon. Once again, are you certain you've never crossed paths with this man? Jon nodded vigorously. Never. I wouldn't recognize him unmasked. He's clever, though. He stole the moment from the king, bested Sandor Clegane, and declared a call to Targaryen loyalty. Everyone's talking about it. It only makes Robert more wary of me. Peter Baelish leaned in, that smirk still playing at the corners of his mouth. Perhaps that was the real goal, to isolate Jon, force the king into renewed paranoia, and drive up tension in the city. A little chaos can be beneficial for the right people, of course. He flicked a glance at Varys, who feigned ignorance. Ned sighed, massaging the bridge of his nose. What we must do is reassure the king. Jon, tomorrow you will go before him in court and swear once more that you had no part in this. I will stand with you and we will attempt to calm him. If we fail, the king might do something rash. Men who fear losing their power often lash out. Jon agreed, though he dreaded the audience. By the time morning arrived, the entire city was abuzz with talk of the Knight of the Dragon. Some saw him as a romantic champion, others as a dangerous rebel. In the Red Keep's throne room, a throng assembled to hear King Robert hold court. The air was thick with tension. Robert slumped on the Iron Throne, looking as though his head pounded from a night of wine. Cersei stood at his side, Joffrey at hers, and the King's Guard arrayed behind them. Jon, wearing a simpler version of the same black and gray garb, approached with Ned Stark. Murmurs rippled as they walked the length of the cavernous hall. At the base of the throne steps, they bowed. Robert glowered down, drumming his fingers on the throne's twisted armrest. "Rise," he said curtly. "What have you to say for yourself, boy?" Jon drew a steadying breath. "I had no knowledge of that knight's plans, your grace. Nor do I condone his actions. My loyalties have not changed. I am under your protection, and I have done nothing to undermine you or your reign." Robert leaned forward, his voice dangerously low. "He swore himself to you, called you the rightful blood of the dragon. Will you deny that you have claim to that legacy?" Jon glanced at Ned, who gave an imperceptible nod. "Your grace," Jon began carefully, "I cannot deny the blood I carry. I am my father's son in that sense. But I do not seek your throne, nor have I declared any intention to overthrow you. That knight acted on his own. I swear it." A hush fell. Robert's gaze bored into Jon's as though searching for any flicker of deception. Silence stretched, broken only by the faint shuffle of feet on the marble floor. Then Robert let out a slow breath, leaning back against the swords that made up the iron throne's back. "Your father's son," he repeated, the words thick with old bitterness. "The father who died by my war hammer on the trident. The father who stole my betrothed. I suppose I can't blame you for your blood, but I can damn sure keep an eye on you." He turned his hard gaze on Ned. "Stark, see to it that this boy stays put. If another Targaryen knight appears, or if I hear even a whisper of conspiracy traced back to him, it will end badly. For all of you." Ned inclined his head. "We understand, your grace. We only want peace in the realm." Robert made a noncommittal grunt. "Yes, peace," he said in a mocking tone, as if the word tasted sour. "Court is done." With that abrupt dismissal, Robert stalked away, leaving the rest of the court to disperse. Jon exhaled shakily. He had avoided imprisonment or worse, but the king's trust, tenuous at best, was once again frayed. That evening, in the privacy of Ned's solar, they discussed the next steps. Ser Barristan was present, as were a few of Ned's most trusted northern guards. Jon paced. Whoever that knight is, he has some skill. He bested the hound without too much trouble, then disappeared. Where could he have gone? Barristan stroked his chin. "I've inquired discreetly among the soldiers. There was a rumor of a black-armored rider passing through a small village on the Rosby Road, but the man paid in gold and left no trace. It's possible he's now halfway to Harrenhal or beyond. But if he truly is a loyalist, he might be heading somewhere to gather more supporters." Ned frowned. "There are pockets of Targaryen sympathy hidden around the realm, especially in places that suffered at the end of the rebellion. House Derry was once loyal, though they've diminished since. The Golden Company across the narrow sea was founded by Targaryen bastards. Dorne harbors old grudges for the fate of Elia Martell. This is dangerous. If a champion arises rallying under the Targaryen banner, it could start a blaze that none of us can easily douse." One of the guards cleared his throat. "My lord, do you think he might be working for Daenerys Targaryen across the sea?" A ripple of tension passed through the room. Ned pressed his lips tight. "We have scant news of Daenerys. Last we heard, she wed a Dothraki Khal, though rumors swirl about her carrying his child. Her brother Viserys was said to be with her. But now we have Jon revealed here in Westeros, recognized by the crown. If Viserys or Daenerys learned of Jon's existence, how would they respond?" Barristan lowered his gaze. "I served Daenerys' father, the Mad King, though I do not take pride in that. The princes and princesses of House Targaryen were once everything to me. I cannot speak to what Viserys might do. He was always rumored to be unstable, perhaps resentful that another Targaryen in Westeros stands in the way of his so-called rights. Daenerys, well, I have only heard she's gentle but overshadowed by her brother. Either of them might want an agent in Westeros to stir up support. Or it could be an entirely separate faction." Jon listened, feeling the old mixture of dread and fascination whenever talk of other Targaryens arose. He knew he shared blood with them, but they were strangers. He had no bond with Viserys or Daenerys, nor reason to risk Robert's wrath by reaching out. Yet he felt a pang of sorrow, knowing that he might have had a family there as well, a link to his father Rhaegar's siblings. If the Black Knight was their agent, it might mean war. After further discussion, it was agreed that they should seek out any rumors regarding Targaryen loyalists quietly, while continuing to assure the king of Jon's harmlessness. The city calmed slightly over the following days, but tension lingered. Jon noticed that the gold cloaks watched him more closely, as though waiting for him to slip away into the night. He could hardly step outside his room without a guard trailing him at a distance. Worse yet, the small folks' whispers grew louder. Some called him the hidden dragon, others the false prince. One afternoon, Sansa confided that her ladies had asked if Jon had grown scales beneath his clothes, or if he would produce dragonfire from his mouth. Sansa admitted she'd snapped at them for their foolishness, but that only fueled their chatter. Jon laughed bitterly when she told him. So it had come to that, ridiculous tales in King's Landing corridors. As the days passed, no new sign of the Night of the Dragon emerged, and life in the Red Keep settled into another uneasy routine. Ned spent hours in council with Robert, quelling rumors of war from across the narrow sea, dealing with the Crown's debts to the Iron Bank, and managing the day-to-day issues of the capital. Arya continued her training under Syrio Farrell, sometimes sneaking off to spar with Jon in a secluded courtyard. Sansa mingled at feasts, trying to maintain her own sense of courtesy and dreaming of a future that was less precarious. Jon's nights remained restless. He dreamed of dragons circling overhead, wings blotting out the sun, and sometimes heard the faint echo of a woman's voice calling his name. A voice he imagined belonged to Lyanna Stark, the mother he never knew. One starlit evening, as he stood by the battlements of the Red Keep, looking out over the city lights below, he sensed a presence behind him. He turned, half expecting Peter Baelish or some guard. Instead, he beheld Margaery Tyrell, a lantern in her hand, wearing a light cloak against the mild breeze. She approached with a gentle smile. "My lady," Jon greeted, dipping his head. "Good evening," she replied, stepping up beside him at the stone parapet. She was perhaps a year or two older than Jon, with a poised demeanor that belied her youth. "I trust you haven't been chased about by any more masked knights lately?" Jon released a soft huff of a laugh. "No, thank the gods. That was more than enough excitement." They gazed out together at the reflection of torchlight in the black waters of the bay. Marjorie's voice was light when she spoke, but there was curiosity in it. "I admit, I never saw a tourney end so dramatically. You must have been shocked." Not how I'd have chosen the day to go," Jon said, choosing his words carefully. Marjorie was known to be politically astute, though always mannerly. "It's brought a good deal of suspicion on me." She nodded sympathetically. "King Robert's wrath is legendary, yet you seem to weather it with grace. My grandmother, the Lady Olenna, says that a man who stands in the path of the king's anger must either be very foolish or very brave. Or perhaps desperate," Jon said. He paused, then ventured. "Your house is powerful and close to the crown through marriage alliances. Do you see a future in which a Targaryen can live in Westeros without constant fear?" Marjorie tilted her head, studying him. "A tough question. If my father, Mace Tyrell, were to speak, he'd say that the realm should remain loyal to King Robert. But we in Highgarden have long memories. We've served Targaryens in the past, and we recall both the good and the ill. My personal belief is that the realm moves in cycles. Houses rise and fall, yet the small folk must keep living." She cast him a thoughtful look. "I think if you truly want a peaceful life, you'll have to forge your own alliances. Prove to the lords that you aren't simply waiting to claim what Robert holds. That might mean marrying into a prominent family, forging kinship that binds you to the realm in a way that neutralizes you as a threat." Jon tensed, recalling that Robert had once half-suggested betrothing him to Myrcella, which would have been a nightmare. "I've no desire to be forced into a match for politics," he said quietly. Marjorie offered a sympathetic shrug. "None of us do, yet that is the way of things for highborn scions and potential claimants. Believe me, I understand how it feels to be viewed as a piece in a game. But if you hope to remain in King's Landing safely, or if you ever hope to travel outside these walls without an armed escort, you may need to consider alliances that make you less frightening to the king." Jon gazed at her face, illuminated by the lantern's glow. Marjorie Tyrell had a reputation for charm and mild cunning. He believed her words were kindly meant but also a subtle nudge, reminding him that House Tyrell might be open to such negotiations. He didn't know whether to feel grateful or wary. "Thank you for your honesty," he replied at length. She inclined her head. "We're both young. The realm is uncertain. But we must carry on, do we not?" She gave a small smile. "Good night, Jon Targaryen. I wish you peaceful dreams." Then she slipped away into the darkness, leaving him with new questions swirling in his mind. Time marched onward, seasons shifting slowly, though the capital's climate changed little. Whispers circulated that across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen's husband, Khal Drogo, had died, and she was rumored to have walked into his funeral pyre only to emerge with live dragons at her side. The idea sounded absurd. Dragons had been extinct for over a century. Yet the rumors persisted, carried by merchants and travelers. If there was even a shred of truth, it meant the Targaryen name was no longer only a memory. Jon listened to these tales with a strange sense of disquiet. If Daenerys truly had dragons, that changed everything. A single living dragon could rival armies and the entire realm would quake. Robert Baratheon, upon hearing these rumors from Varys, raged that the last Targaryens must be exterminated before they gained any foothold. Ned Stark argued against assassinating a young girl across the sea, but the council was divided. Some, like Littlefinger, remained ambiguous. Others, like Stannis, demanded immediate action to end the threat. In the end, Robert authorized a stealth mission to track Daenerys' movements, though Ned refused to support it openly. Jon, left on the sidelines, felt sickened that the king would condone killing a pregnant or possibly newborn mother. Daenerys was his blood kin, after all, but he dared not speak too loudly for fear of inciting Robert's wrath anew. Meanwhile, tension crackled at home. Tywin Lannister grew ever more reclusive in Casterly Rock, but rumors said he was marshalling resources. Why, no one knew for certain. Some guessed he was preparing for a confrontation with House Tully or House Martell. Others suspected he feared a Targaryen resurgence. The fact that Cersei had not borne Robert any more children and that Joffrey was approaching manhood left the question of succession looming uncomfortably. For Jon, the days became a chain of sword practice, polite meals, and careful avoidance of any appearance of conspiring. Arya quarreled constantly with Septas, who wanted her to sit at needlework. Sansa tried to maintain a facade of courtesy but grew bored and restless. She missed the simpler times in the north. Ned struggled to rein in Robert's wilder impulses. And every night, Jon ended up on the battlements or in the Godswood, wrestling with the knowledge that House Targaryen might be rising anew across the sea. Late one afternoon, as the sun painted the sky with molten gold over Blackwater Bay, a letter arrived at the Red Keep, addressed to Jon Targaryen in careful script. The messenger, a boy in the livery of House Rosby, delivered it and vanished. Jon opened the letter in a quiet alcove, reading by the light from a high, narrow window. The contents made his heart skip. It was signed, "The Knight of the Dragon." The words were brief. "I serve the legacy of your father, Prince Rhaegar. I act without your consent but in your name, for the good of the realm. I shall not be found unless I wish it, but know that you have allies who yearn for the rightful blood. Should you ever decide to press your claim, you have only to call and swords will rise. Knight of the Dragon." A cold sweat broke out on Jon's brow. Someone had gotten this letter into the Red Keep, bypassing all the king's watchers. Someone who claimed to speak for Targaryen loyalists. Fear churned in Jon's stomach, mixed with a twinge of strange excitement. Allies, the letter said. Did that mean a hidden army or just a handful of knights? Could it be the beginnings of a real bid for the throne that Jon did not want? He folded the letter and placed it in his pocket, uncertain whom to tell. If he gave it directly to Ned, Ned might insist on informing the king. That could jeopardize Jon's fragile safety. Yet if Jon kept it secret, he risked being implicated in conspiracy should it come to light. It was a no-win choice, emblematic of his entire existence since the truth of his parentage had emerged. In the end, Jon took the letter to Ned in private, explaining in hushed tones that he had no part in inviting it. Ned read it with a stoic expression, then tore it into pieces. "We must speak of this to no one," Ned said. "To reveal it would only fuel Robert's paranoia. Burn the pieces." Jon nodded and watched as Ned dropped the torn scraps into the fireplace, the flames licking them into ash. Even so, the words lingered in Jon's mind. "You have only to call." Could it really be that straightforward, that men would rise in his name if he but asked? Or was it a trap, a way to lure him into open treason? That night, Jon found little rest, tossing under the thin sheets of his bed. At some point, he dozed off and dreamed he stood in a courtyard of black stone. Before him loomed a monstrous dragon, midnight in color, with eyes like burning coals. Its roar shook the ground. He reached for his sword, but the sword was gone, replaced by a silver harp. He tried to play the harp, but no sound emerged. The dragon roared again, and he felt its hot breath wash over him. When it opened its maw, he saw swirling flames, and within those flames the faint outline of a woman's face, pale with dark hair like lioness. The dragon's jaws snapped shut, and Jon awoke gasping. He rose, splashed water on his face, and stared into the small mirror on his table. He saw a boy of the north, solemn eyes ringed by exhaustion, haunted by a destiny he had never asked for. He whispered to the reflection, "I do not want to be a king," but the reflection offered no answer. In the weeks that followed, King Robert's health took a turn. He grew more temperamental and was frequently bedridden by gout or hangovers. Cersei tried to manage the court's daily affairs, but found little support from Ned Stark, who mistrusted her, or from the lords who disliked her Lannister ambitions. Joffrey strutted about like a young hawk, snapping commands at servants. The city's tension flared anew when a fresh rumor arrived from the east. Daenerys Targaryen had not only hatched dragons but was forging alliances in the Red Waste, rallying freed slaves and Dothraki loyalists. The story sounded more like a fable, but Robert was spurred into talk of sending even more assassins. One day, at a contentious small council meeting, Robert half shouted, "If one Targaryen in Westeros is already causing me this much grief, how much worse if dragons come flying across the sea? I'll not have it." He slammed his cup down, wine sloshing. "Kill her. Kill her whelps. Kill them all." Ned slammed his own fist down. "You cannot murder a woman and her unborn child. That is monstrous." Robert's glare was ferocious. "Spare me your mercy, Stark. You know how the Targaryens burned our people, how they slew your father and brother. The Mad King, and now his spawn wants to bring dragons back. Or do you side with her because you've hidden one Targaryen in your household already?" At that, Ned's face reddened, but he forced himself calm. "There is a difference between Jon and Daenerys. Jon is a boy raised in the north, loyal to you. Daenerys is a stranger, across the sea, rumored to be hatching dragons. Even if those dragons exist, they are no immediate threat. We can wait, watch, and see what the truth is before we commit the realm to a cowardly act of murder." Robert's chest heaved, but for once he grudgingly yielded. "Very well, but if those rumors prove true, if that girl sets foot in Westeros with her monsters, I will not hesitate. And if Jon has any sympathy for her, I'll—" He cut himself off, glaring at Ned. "We'll see." That evening, Ned relayed the heated exchange to Jon in private. Jon felt sick with the knowledge that Robert's hatred for Targaryens ran deep, and if Daenerys truly had dragons, the entire realm could be thrown into war. Where did that leave Jon? Caught between two worlds, neither fully a Stark nor a Targaryen, recognized yet never accepted by the king. Ned placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. "You must remain steadfast. Do nothing to provoke Robert or the Lannisters. If Daenerys truly has dragons, we may face a crisis like none in living memory. The realm could fracture. We must hold to what's right and what keeps our people safe." Jon nodded, though inwardly he was torn. Part of him felt that if Daenerys truly lived, she was family, and a piece of Rhaegar that endured. But he had no illusions about Robert's willingness to spill Targaryen blood. For the time being, Jon resolved simply to survive and guard his own. As winter's approach shaded the days, the North was on his mind more than ever. Ravens brought word that Robb Stark was growing into a capable young lord, that Bran was mastering the bow, and Rickon was still wild as a wolf cub. Catelyn Stark's letters were polite but distant. She had never fully overcome her resentment that Ned brought home another woman's child. Yet she wrote kindly enough for appearance's sake, and she always sent her hopes for Jon's well-being. Occasionally, Jon saw a flicker of warmth from Robert, particularly on nights when the king reminisced about fighting side by side with Ned in the rebellion. After several cups of wine, Robert would speak of the old days, how Rhaegar had done this or that, how the war had turned on that single confrontation at the Trident. But the next morning, Robert would revert to his scowling mistrust. Jon came to accept that it was the best he could hope for. One crisp morning, word spread that a prominent merchant ship from Braavos had docked, carrying exotic goods and foreign dignitaries. A number of courtiers visited the docks to greet them. Jon decided to accompany Ser Barristan, hoping to catch a glimpse of the city beyond the Red Keep's walls. He had not ventured out in weeks, a result of Robert's watchful restrictions. But the king grudgingly permitted this excursion so long as Jon took a suitable escort. They rode through the streets, the gold cloaks clearing a path. Jon saw the squalor of Flea Bottom, the anxious faces of small folk who recognized him. Some spat at his passing, some bowed, some just stared. At the harbor, grand ships rocked gently against the piers, sails furled. The Braavosi vessel displayed a proud purple hull with a carved mermaid figurehead. Braavosi guards in flamboyant attire stood on the dock. As Jon dismounted, Barristan at his side, a man in fine robes approached, a Braavosi magister by the look of him. The magister bowed smoothly. "My lords, greetings from Braavos. I am Magister Marevo. Might you be the Targaryen princeling I've heard so much about?" Jon felt a spike of alarm but forced a neutral smile. "I am Jon Targaryen by blood, yes. Merely a ward of King Robert now." Marevo flashed a bright grin. "The ears of Braavos catch many rumors, my young lord. I'd heard that the last Targaryen was exiled, but it appears not all were accounted for. We come to trade, but also to gather news. I do hope the city is peaceful." Barristan bristled. "It is as peaceful as any city can be, with so many tongues wagging about dragons." Marevo cocked his head. "Dragons? Do you mean the rumors of Daenerys Storeborn across the sea, or the masked champion we heard whispers of some Night of the Dragon? Quite the sensation in Braavos, I must say. We Braavosi love a good story." Jon exchanged a tense glance with Barristan. It seemed that word of the knight's dramatic appearance had spread beyond Westeros. "We know little more than rumor ourselves," he said carefully. "He came and went in a flash." Marevo nodded. "A pity. Braavos might pay handsomely for such a performance. Some say he belongs to a group of Targaryen loyalists hidden in Westeros waiting for the right moment." Jon tried to keep his voice steady. "Whatever they might be, I have no connection to them." Of course, Marevo said with an indulgent smile. "We are simply collectors of information as well as fine goods. Perhaps we shall see you at court soon? We bring gifts for the king and for the queen as well." Barristan was quick to deflect. "The king is not best pleased with foreigners who come bearing idle chatter of Targaryens, Magister. Tread carefully." The Braavosi man gave a theatrical bow. "We shall." Then he returned to his ship, speaking to his companions in low, lilting tones. Jon exhaled. Even among foreign merchants, the Targaryen question was a topic of fascination. He could not escape it no matter how he tried. They stayed only briefly at the docks. On the return journey, Barristan said quietly, "If Braavosi have such interest, it may be that they smell a shift in power. The Iron Bank has been known to fund rebels when it suits them if the crown is deeply in debt. And the crown is indeed deeply in debt to them." Jon felt a stirring of dread. This was precisely the sort of entanglement Ned Stark had been warning him about. Foreign financiers could back a Targaryen restoration if they believed it would ensure repayment. "I'm not sure what I can do about it," he said glumly. "If they think I'm a potential puppet, they're wrong." "That may not stop them from trying," Barristan said. When they arrived back at the Red Keep, the guard at the gates informed them that King Robert had taken ill again, locked in his chambers with Cersei forbidding visitors. Rumor had it the king had collapsed after an argument with her. Some whispered poison, others claimed it was simply Robert's overindulgence. Whatever the cause, Robert was unavailable, leaving the governance of the city to Ned's hand. Late that night, Jon heard shouting in the corridors. He grabbed his sword and rushed out, finding men with torches running toward Robert's chambers. The king was thrashing in his bed, raving with fever, delirious. Maesters hovered anxiously, applying poultices, trying to bring down his temperature. Cersei paced like a caged lioness, eyes wild. Joffrey lurked in a corner, looking equal parts fascinated and terrified. When Ned arrived, Cersei spun on him, shrieking, "Fix this. He's your friend, isn't he?" Ned tried to calm her, instructing the maesters to do what they could. For 3 days, Robert lingered in delirium, babbling about the trident, about Lyanna, about a silver harp he had once burned. Jon was only allowed near him once, and Robert recoiled as if seeing Rhaegar's ghost. Eventually, the fever broke, but Robert was left weakened, forced to convalesce. In that time, Joffrey and Cersei asserted themselves more forcefully in court. Joffrey demanded reverence from the lords and ladies, calling himself the rightful heir and hinting that if Robert did not recover, he would soon be king. Ned maneuvered carefully, reminding them that Robert still lived, but it was clear the Lannisters intended to seize the moment. Tension reached a tipping point when Joffrey ordered that a statue of Aerys Targaryen in the throne room's corner be defaced, a relic from the old days that had been left to gather dust. He declared any Targaryen symbol here is an insult. Destroy it. Jon watched from the sidelines as gold cloaks smashed the statue's face. A hideous scraping echoed in the throne room. He fought the urge to protest that the statue was not Aerys alone, but a reflection of centuries of kings. Yet he knew it would do no good. The Lannisters wanted to stoke hatred of Targaryens. When Robert finally emerged from his bed, gaunt and pale, Joffrey's show of authority had already gained momentum. Cersei kept pressing Robert to name Joffrey as regent. Robert refused, but each refusal drained his energy. He took to sitting in the council chambers, blank-eyed, letting Ned handle most matters. Some realized the king was on the decline, fueling speculation about what would happen next. Would Stannis stake a claim if Robert died? Would Joffrey assume the throne unchallenged? Or would the realm fracture? Amid all this turmoil, Jon found himself more isolated than ever. He was summoned less frequently to appear before Robert, and when he did see the king, Robert gazed at him with hollow eyes. "You are your father's son," Robert muttered once, "and I can't stand the sight of your face." Jon bowed stiffly and withdrew. There was nothing to say. Perhaps the only measure of hope came when Jon caught Ned in a moment of reflection one evening in the Godswood. Ned was kneeling by the small weirwood, hands folded, as if in prayer. Jon approached quietly, not wanting to disturb him, until Ned looked up, noticing him. "Jon," Ned said softly, rising, "I was just thinking of your mother." Jon blinked, then joined him by the heart tree. The air was still, the red leaves rustling faintly in the breeze. "Lyanna," he said, testing the name. Ned nodded. "A part of me regrets not telling you everything sooner. Perhaps you would have had time to prepare. I thought I was saving you from danger, but I fear I simply delayed the inevitable. Fate has a way of catching up with us." He looked Jon in the eyes. "But know this, your mother loved you. She wanted you safe, wanted you to be a child first, not a tool for anyone's ambition." Jon swallowed against the lump in his throat. "I wish I could have known her. And my father." Ned's gaze slipped away, haunted by memories of blood and heartbreak at the Tower of Joy. "I wish that as well." Rhaegar was a complicated man, but he was not the monster Robert believed. Lyanna saw something in him, enough to risk everything. He shook his head. "Look at what's become of us now. The realm stands on the brink, and I'm not sure how to avert it. I can only pray to the old gods that we find a path of peace." Jon felt a surge of fierce devotion toward this man who had raised him, who had protected him at such cost. He knelt by Ned's side and bowed his head. In the stillness of the Godswood, he whispered, "I will not betray you, father. I will not betray the North, nor will I go seeking a crown." Ned placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. "I know, son, if only that were enough. The realm is bigger than us, and others may try to use your name. We must remain vigilant." The Godswood leaves rustled overhead, and somewhere in the gloom, a raven croaked. Jon closed his eyes, sending a silent plea to the old gods for guidance, feeling as though 1,000 unseen eyes watched him from the heart tree's carved face. Perhaps the old gods would not answer, but he found a measure of solace in the hush, in the presence of the man who had been more father than Rhaegar ever had the chance to be. They parted ways, Ned returning to the tower that served as his quarters. Jon lingered a while, lost in thought. When he eventually made his way back through the torchlit corridors, he found a familiar figure leaning against a pillar in the gloom. Peter Baelish, hands folded, a half-smile on his lips. "A touching scene, I'm sure," Baelish said. "I do wonder how the old gods might shape your destiny." Jon stiffened. "You followed me?" "Merely walking, my young lord. These corridors do twist in interesting ways." Baelish's tone was as mild as fresh milk. "I must ask, though, have you considered forging a real alliance? Or will you wait until all the realm decides your fate for you?" Jon bristled. "I'm no king. There's no alliance to forge." "Oh, but you are of the blood, are you not? You are House Targaryen, recognized by the crown. If Robert dies and Joffrey's legitimacy is questioned by certain well-informed parties, you might find yourself with a sudden wave of support. Wouldn't it be wise to prepare for that possibility? Jon scowled. I will not plan for the king's death. Baelish shrugged. I never said you should, but wise men consider all possibilities. You are not a man who enjoys this game, but if you do not play, others will play it for you. The Knight of the Dragon, the Braavosi bankers, the loyalists in Dorne. Someone will make you their centerpiece, or they will cut you down to remove you from the board. He gave a thin smile. Best to be ready. With that, Baelish strode off, leaving Jon simmering with frustration. The man was right in one sense. The realm was a game, and everyone seemed determined to cast Jon as a piece or a threat. He felt again the crushing weight of fate. In the days that followed, Robert's health remained precarious. He attended few public functions, leaving Cersei and Ned to handle the administrative tasks of the kingdom. Tension between them crackled, with Cersei belittling Ned's sense of honor and Ned, in turn, refusing to bow to her manipulations. Joffrey paraded around with a swagger, openly mocking Jon whenever their paths crossed, though he didn't dare raise a sword against him in front of so many witnesses. At last came a morning that changed everything. A messenger arrived at dawn, banging on Ned's door. Jon, who had been in the hall, overheard the frantic voices. The messenger declared that King Robert had collapsed in his chambers, unresponsive. The maesters were tending him, but they feared the worst. Ned, face pale, hurried to Robert's side, with Jon trailing behind. They found Robert lying in bed, his skin a sickly shade, breath coming in shallow gasps. Cersei hovered, tears streaking her cheeks, though her expression twisted between grief and anger. Joffrey stood near, face pale. The king's eyes flicked open momentarily. He groaned Ned's name. Ned knelt at his bedside, leaning close. My old friend, Robert wheezed, voice weak. The boar. I dreamed of the boar. I should have... He coughed, flecks of blood spotting his lips. Lyanna, tell her I'm sorry. Then his head lolled, eyes rolling back. The maesters cried out, scurrying to administer potions. Cersei let out a wail. Joffrey looked on with panic behind his eyes, perhaps not ready for the day he'd become king, but eager for power all the same. For hours, Robert lingered, drifting in and out of consciousness. Courtiers gathered in antechambers, whispering of the line of succession. Some asked if Stannis had been notified. Cersei insisted that Joffrey was the rightful heir. Many looked to Ned for leadership, but Ned was torn. If Robert died, war might erupt. At sunset, Robert breathed his last. The moment hung in the air like a final chord struck on a broken harp. A hush fell in the chamber, broken only by Cersei's sobs. Joffrey's face turned blank, then he declared loudly for all to hear, I am king now. Ned Stark closed Robert's eyes with a trembling hand. He looked at Jon, sorrow etched in his face. In that shared glance, they both understood the realm would never be the same. Jon Targaryen, recognized but not named heir, now stood in a kingdom ruled by Joffrey Baratheon unless other claims arose, unless storms battered the fragile peace. Outside, bells began to toll, proclaiming King Robert's death, each resonant chime a harbinger of the tempest to come. Thus ended the reign of Robert Baratheon. In his place stood a boy king whose temper was as short as his pride was grand. And across the Red Keep's corridors, lords and ladies began to whisper anew of the Targaryen in their midst, the hidden dragon who might one day challenge the stag or be devoured by it. The stage was set, the lines drawn, and Jon found himself in the center of a gathering storm that promised no mercy. The blood of dragons never passed quietly from the world, and as the bells tolled, Jon realized that the realm would soon test whether he possessed the steel to survive, or if the legacy of fire and blood would consume them all.